All right, good morning, All Saints Church. Happy Pride. Happy Pride. It's still Pride Month and we're here. Thank you so much for being with us throughout this month. And even though we conclude the month of Pride Month, the movement continues. And it is my joy. I'm just so excited that Jonathan Quinn is in the pulpit of All Saints Church. And Jonathan is one of my partners in ministry for the LGBTQ plus ministry. And I'm just delighted, Jonathan, that you're here with us. So give it away.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning. I've had the opportunity to get to know many of you already, but if you don't know me yet, there are a couple things that would be helpful for you to know. First, I wasn't always the glamorous woman you see before you. As I feel stubble threaten to poke out through my foundation, I may not be here for very much longer either, so I'll try to keep this brief. If you're watching this on YouTube later, you can speed up the video, and it'll be like a Chia Pet commercial. Chia. The second thing you should know about me is I didn't grow up Episcopalian, so sometimes the liturgy and the terminology and the culture of the Episcopal Church, they seemed really strange to me. Between ourselves, they still seem kind of strange to me. It reminds me of a story I heard about a film star and queer icon Tallulah Bankhead, who was visiting a high church service. My parents would have called it Smells and Bells. She was watching the thurifer, the person charged with carrying the incense, processing up the aisle, and she leaned over to him and said, "Darling, I love your frock, but your purse is on fire." And in an attempt to forestall any similar misunderstandings, I want to take a moment to explain why I'm choosing to preach in drag this morning. First, I want to draw attention to the fact that the rights of LGBTQ people, especially those of trans and gender nonconforming and drag performers, are under attack in this nation right now. Even our right to exist in public is being brought up for debate, being brought before legislatures. Second, I wanted to symbolically resist a pressure that's constantly put on queer people to just tone it down. Don't be so loud. Don't be so yourself. We're told, you were born this way, baby, but because you're not cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, upper-middle-class white men, you have the wrong kind of body. You have the wrong kind of body to love whom you love. You have the wrong kind of body to wear a dress or not to wear a dress. You have the wrong kind of body to be allowed to make choices about that body. You have the wrong kind of body to be allowed in the restroom or in sports or around children or in church, especially in the pulpit. You have the wrong kind of body to be allowed to make an honest living. Even you have the wrong kind of body to be allowed to live. And we see the same kind of gatekeeping on our readings today. Hannah was told that she had the wrong kind of body because she was a disabled woman who was unable to conceive and bear children in a society in which the value of women was largely predicated on their reproductive capacity. 3,000 years later, we're not doing much better on that score. And then the Canaanite woman, I don't like that she's not named. I don't want to keep calling her the Canaanite woman. The Gospel Mark calls her the Syrophoenician woman, and that's not much better. One really old Christian sermon claims her name was Eusta, and I think that's better than nothing, so I'm going to call her Eusta. So Eusta was told that she had the wrong kind of body because she was a woman and a Canaanite, a member of one of the people groups that had a history of mutual hostility and violence with the Jewish people. Because Hannah and Eusta were believed to have the wrong kind of body, people in their communities believed it was right to deny them equal standing in those communities, to deny them access to care, and to try to deny them access to God by denying them access to religious people and practices. Again, we're not really doing any better. Though Hannah and Eustace's sufferings came in large part because the people with power in their context decided they had the wrong kind of body, it was also because they had the wrong kind of body and didn't let anyone with the right kind of body get in their way, that led both to become the icons of strength and of faith that we're still reading about thousands of years later. Both women come up against religious people, Eli the priest, Jesus' disciples, even Jesus himself, who try to shame them, silence them, get them to go away. Both are told that because they have the wrong kind of body, they shouldn't set their hopes up too high. They're encouraged to settle. But both refuse to give up until they get what they've set their heart on. Their greatness lies in their persistence, in their resistance. They threw the first bricks at Stonewall. They told those men who stood between them and their liberation, in the words of one of my favorite mothers of the church, Miss Kylie Minogue, "Get out of my way, get out of my way. No, I ain't going home because I want to stay. Now I've showed you what I'm made of. This is what'll happen if you ain't giving a girl what she needs." And through their acts of resistance, they overcame. Hannah becomes the mother of a literal miracle baby. Her status in her community and within the family are elevated, and her trust in God is vindicated. Eusta obtains the healing she sought for her daughter. Her faith in Jesus is vindicated, and in her rebuttal to Jesus, she becomes one of the church's first liberation theologians. And they could not have achieved what they did if they hadn't had the wrong kind of body. In the same way, queer people would not be as strong as we are if we hadn't had to fight so hard just to survive. Queer people wouldn't know ourselves as well as we do if we hadn't had so many people trying to tell us who we are, what we want, whom we can love. Queer people wouldn't be as fabulous as we are if we hadn't been brought up in a world that tried its hardest to dim our light. Queer people wouldn't love so fiercely if we hadn't had to risk everything, sometimes even our very lives, for the sake of love. Queer people of faith wouldn't be able to hear God's voice as clearly as we do if we hadn't had to endure a lifetime of priests, parents, politicians, even pedestrians, spewing hate and ignorance and telling us they spoke with the voice of God. Stumbling blocks must come, but woe to him through whom they come. For too long, those of us with the wrong kind of body have been made to suffer for it, and we have not even had the opportunities to exercise the strengths we had to develop to survive that suffering. I'm grateful for the opportunity to preach this morning, but for how many years were openly LGBTQ people kept out of this pulpit? I was honored to be able to marry my husband right over here, but for how many years were same and similar gender couples denied access to the sacrament of marriage right here? I'm looking forward to being able to assist with the ministry of the Eucharist this morning, but for how many years were LGBTQ people made to feel as if we weren't welcome or worthy around this very table? For too long, those of us with the wrong kind of body have been forced to beg for scraps and pressured to be content with them. Scraps like inclusion and affirmation. LGBTQ people don't want to be just included on what straight people already have going on. Because straight people kicked us out of their homes, their churches, their bars, their lives, their cultures, LGBTQ people have had the critical distance necessary to begin the work of identifying and dismantling some of the more toxic traits that our cultures of origin tried to instill in us. When LGBTQ people come to church, we don't want to be forced to re-inhabit the same kinds of cultures that tried to silence us, change us, and kill us for having the wrong kind of body. Nor are we just looking for churches to affirm us. It's not enough to just say the right thing and avoid saying the wrong things to queer people, although that would be a start. I want a church that listens to queer people. I want a church that loves Jesus enough to look for his face in the faces of the marginalized, and to listen for his voice, not just in our stories, but in our prophetic critiques, even and especially when they're a little shady. Because things in the church and wider world have been looking particularly critiquable these days. Far too much so for the church to continue to throw scraps only to the LGBTQ people and others on the margins who will tone it down and not make waves. The Shih Tzus and the Bichon Frisés. For the good of the church and the world she serves, it's time to pull up some more chairs and set out some more plates for us mutts and rescue pit bulls. Because this female dog's about ready to jump up on this table. Because even though we've been silenced and beaten and cast out and killed, people with the wrong kind of body have been working to improve the very churches and cultures that mistreated us. working to abolish slavery, to fight for women's right to vote, to work, and have bodily autonomy, working to start and continue movements for equal rights for Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, disabled people, and LGBTQ people, working to continue the work that Jesus started. And in these movements, we can see what God has been up to in the world. The same God who freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and who did not let the agents of state violence have the last word on Jesus but raised him up from the grave, this same God hasn't abandoned us, but has been very busy, working through people with the wrong kind of body. God has not left themselves without a witness in the world, but is there wherever people with a wrong kind of body learn to love ourselves and each other, learn to set ourselves and each other free. This God is there when the powerful are brought down from their thrones, when the lowly are lifted up, when the hungry are filled with good things and the rich are sent away empty. Now, if you're one of the people who has historically been centered, if you have the right kind of body, white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, financially stable, or at least a lot of these, it might be a struggle to experience this as good news. If God is bringing about the realities of the kingdom of God through those of us on the margins, does that mean you're going to be left behind? If in the more just world God is building, everyone has enough, everyone has equal opportunities for flourishing, does that mean you're going to have less? And facing the possibility of exclusion and loss, it's scary. Now, would choosing to freely give up power and privilege and possessions be as profound a suffering as the suffering experienced by those to whom these were denied in the first place or who had them stolen from us? Well, no, maybe not. But all suffering deserves our understanding and compassion. And if you're anxious about whether you'll have a place in the new world that God is building, who can understand this feeling better than a member of the LGBTQ community or another marginalized community who knows what it feels like not to have a place in this world, who knows what it's like to have to fight for and win one? We'll get through this together. In the kingdom of God, there's room for every kind of body. Now I say to those, whether because you're LGBTQ or a person of color, or a woman, or disabled, or fat, or neurodivergent, if you've ever been told or treated like you have the wrong kind of body, especially if you heard it so much that you've begun to tell it to yourself, God says to you, me too. I have the wrong kind of body too. I chose it so that I could be like you, so that you would know in your wrong kind of body that you'll never be alone. Because when God became a human, when they decided to start serving body, they made for themselves the wrong kind of body. God could have chosen for themselves a Roman body, the body of a colonizing people, but they chose for themselves a Jewish body, the body of a people of a stolen land. God could have chosen for themselves a body born into wealth, but they chose a body born into poverty. God could have chosen for themselves a body of celebrity born into celebrities, but they chose a body conceived out of wedlock to a couple nobody ever heard of. Other people might look at you and think, you might look at yourself in the mirror and think that you've got the wrong kind of body. But God looks at your body and thinks, this is exactly the right kind of body for my spirit to dwell in. This is exactly the right type of body to continue the work that Jesus did in the world. That's the right type of body to set the prisoner free, to heal the sick, to feed the hungry. That's the right type of body to carry my good news of liberation for all people. So let's get to it. And God help any kind of body that tries to get in our way.